Okay, so in the last lesson, we did solving inequalities using addition and subtraction. And so today we're just going to be doing multiplication and division. All right, so really just one step inequalities, pretty straightforward like we did in the previous lesson. Okay, so let's take a look at multiplication property first. All right, so if you have a positive number that you're multiplying by, all right, then if you have an example, x divided by 2 is greater than -5, think about how you would isolate the x. What would we do? We would multiply both sides by 2. So therefore, these would cancel, and we would get x greater than -10. So if it's greater than here, obviously it stays greater than. The next example, so just looking at the one below it, if x over 3 is less than 1, again, what would we do to both sides? We would multiply both sides by 3, and so we would get x is less than 3. So that's when you're multiplying by a positive number. However, when you have a negative number that you are multiplying by, basically what happens if it's greater than, it switches to less than. If it's less than, it switches greater than. So again, the sign switches when multiplying by a negative number. So in this example, when we multiply both sides by -2, these are going to cancel, and then greater than sign switches to less than. And then we multiply the right side, so -5 times -2 is a positive 10. Okay, so let's take a look at the examples. We have x over 2 is less than -3. So what are we going to do? We're going to multiply both sides by 2. And that's multiplying by a positive 2. So that means that less than sign stays less than. -3 times 2 is -6. And then let's go ahead and graph it. So at -6, which is here, we're going to put an open circle. And less than means we're going to shade to the left. All right, for b, again, we want to isolate the variable, so we want to get rid of that 1/2. When we have fractions, I like to multiply by the reciprocal, so that means I'm going to multiply both sides by 2 over 1, or just multiply by 2. That will cancel the 1/2. We multiplied both sides by a positive number, so that sign stays. 2 times -1 is -2. So it's okay if this number is a negative. The sign does not switch. It only switches if the number that we're multiplying both sides by is negative. I'm just going to rewrite this. Remember how I like to put the variable on the left side. So it's going to be n greater than -2. So here's -2. Put an open circle, shade to the right. All right, take a look at C. We have x over -4 is less than or equal to 2. So I see this time I have a -4 in the denominator. That means I need to multiply both sides by a -4. Now, notice this time I'm multiplying both sides by a negative. So I'm going to get x, that less than or equal to is going to change to a greater than or equal to. And we put -8. So here's -8. This one's going to be a closed circle because it's greater than or equal to. And we're going to shade to the right. Okay. If you want to try the next few on your own, you can pause it and then press play and come back and see if you got them correct. Otherwise, you can just follow along. So here I'm going to multiply both sides by 3. So I get x greater than or equal to -9. Again, we multiplied both sides by a +3. Here's -9, close circle. We're going to shade to the right. For E, I have 2/3 x is less than or equal to -6. So in order to cancel that 2/3, I'm going to multiply both sides by 3/2. So that's going to cancel everything except for the x. Less than or equal to. Keep in mind, right, if you're not good with fractions, so we have a -6. Go to Desmos, right? -6. Oops. -6 times, and then it was 3/2, and that gives us a -9. So here's -9 again. This time it's less than, so it's just going to be a really small little part to shade. Okay, last one of this example. Okay, I want to get rid of the -4/3. That's the coefficient of x. So I'm going to multiply. Here's the key, don't forget. We want to make that a positive x. So I'm going to multiply both sides by -3/4. That means that symbol is going to switch. So let's see, -3/4. So -3/4 times 12. Don't forget, if you're using the Desmos app, that you have to you want to make sure you use your arrows to multiply, but you don't want to get the multiplication in the denominator. And, oh, how about that? We get -9 again. And then we just want to rewrite that, so it's going to be x greater than or equal to -9. So here's -9. So it actually ends up the same result as we have in the graph directly above. Okay, so those are all multiplying to solve an inequality. The opposite is division. Okay, so this is when we divide the same thing on both sides. Okay, and similar rules apply. So if you have a positive number, basically if it's greater than, it stays greater than. If it's less than, it stays less than. So here, if 2x is greater than -6, then x would be greater than -3. In the next example below, if 4x is less than 12, we would divide both sides by 4. So that would be x is less than 3. However, if you have a negative number, if it starts out as greater than and you divide both sides by a negative, the sign switches to less than. If it's a less than and you divide by a negative, the sign switches to greater than. So here I'm going to divide both sides by -3. So just like when we multiply by a negative, when we divide by a negative, it also changes. So this is going to become x less than -3. And here in this one, if I divide both sides by -4, I get x is greater than a +5. So again, the sign switches when dividing by a negative. Okay, so let's look at solving each inequality, and then also I should have written in here and graph solution. Okay, so I'm going to divide both sides by 6. So we're going to get 4 is greater than y. We're going to switch that around so it's y is less than 4. So here's 4, open circle, and I'm going to shade to the left. Again, feel free if you would like, you can pause it and you can try these on your own if you want to see if you got the hang of it. Okay, so we want to negative 14a greater than or equal to negative 56. We're going to divide both sides by negative 14. So negative 56 divided by negative 14. And that's going to give us a positive 4. And since we divided both sides by a negative, that's going to switch this to less than or equal to 4. So here's 4. We're going to put a closed circle, less than or equal to, so we're going to shade left. Okay, C. I'm going to divide both sides by a positive 7. So we divided both sides by a positive 7. We get negative 3. The sign stays. I'm just going to rewrite it so my variable's on the left side. So that's going to be C greater than negative 3. So here's negative 3, open circle, and shade to the right. Here we want to divide both sides by 5. G stays less than 4. So we're going to put an open circle, and we're going to shade left. Okay, we are going to divide both sides by 14. Now, when I take 21 and I divide it by 14, I get 3 over 2. It doesn't go in evenly. All right, and I think we talked about this the other day. If you have a fraction, it might help to rewrite. So 3 over 2, you can write that as 1.5 or 1.5. So that means when we're graphing it, here's 1 and here's 2. We would just want to mark that spot right between 1 and 2. It's an open circle, so I'm going to put an open circle around that. And we're going to go greater than. So it's okay to get a fraction or a decimal. We can still graph that on the number line. And lastly, we have negative 6x greater than 42. So we're going to divide both sides by a negative 2. So that's going to make that sign switch from greater than to less than. And we get negative 7. So here's negative 7. We're going to put an open circle, and we're going to shade left. Okay, so that's it for this lesson. So now you're going to go back to the Pear Deck, and you're going to finish those last couple questions. And if you finish all that, then you can start on the worksheet for homework.